gave my guy my word of honor to...
You know their voices. You have known their voices your entire life. Every time you hear My Guy, they are there. Every time I Heard It Through the Grapevine plays, they are in the background. They sang on the Four Tops records, on Marvin Gaye's records, on the Supremes records, on the Marvelettes records, on an estimated 20,000 Motown recordings across a decade. Their names never appeared on a single sleeve. Tonight, the ghost singers of Hitsville, USA, and the records their voices secretly built. Number 12, the Andantes. Three women walked into Hitsville, USA in 1962 and never quite walked back out, not for 10 years. Jackie Hicks, Marlene Barrow, and Louvain Demps formed the Andantes, the in-house background vocal trio that Berry Gordy used so systematically, so consistently, and so completely that historians now estimate they appeared on approximately 20,000 Motown recordings across the label's first decade. I gave my guy my word of honor to... 20,000. They were not credited on any of them. Their names do not appear on the sleeve of My Guy or Baby I Need Your Loving or I Heard It Through the Grapevine or any of the hundreds of other recordings that their specific vocal blend, Louvain's soprano, Jackie's first alto, Marlene's second alto, helped define as the definitive Motown sound. My Guy, recorded by Mary Wells in 1964 and produced by Smokey Robinson, was Motown's first #1 pop single. It is the record that proved the label could top the mainstream pop chart. The Andantes are on it, responding to Wells in the call and response passages that give the record its specific texture. What you say? Tell me more. That response vocal, the specific voice that answers Mary Wells's lead, is Louvain Demps. She received no credit. The record went to #1. Motown's history changed. Ivy Jo Hunter, who wrote songs for Marvin Gaye and Gladys Knight, later said the Andantes had a heavenly gift. Louvain Demps, in an ARP interview conducted in 2018, when she was 80 years old, said, "I don't care how high anybody goes. It does not lower me any lower, because I know what I did." She knew. The world is still finding out. Number 11, Louvain Demps.
What do you mean something funky going down? Oh man, I'm over here working. It's going down. Look here. I just saw you.
Louvain Demps was the soprano of the Andantes, the voice that reached above the mid-range harmonies Jackie Hicks and Marlene Barrow were anchoring and gave the Andantes sound its specific brightness. She was a reserved Catholic woman from Detroit who had come to the Motown world through the Rayber Voices, the founding background vocal group that preceded the Andantes, and who had found in the specific architecture of three-voice harmony with Hicks and Barrow something that she later described as clicking right away, first time, first song, perfect blend. I Heard It Through the Grapevine, recorded by Marvin Gaye in 1968 after Berry Gordy had shelved it in the vault, is one of the most distinctive productions in the Motown catalog. Norman Whitfield's arrangement, creating a sonic atmosphere of paranoid intensity that had never quite appeared in Hitsville before.
Love you no more, man. I guess she don't love you no more. Look here. I got to go now, man. I got to go.
The background vocal arrangement is crucial to that atmosphere. The voices entering precisely, landing on specific pitches that reinforce the song's harmonic tension without releasing it. Louvain Demps' soprano is in those harmonies. The voice that gives Grapevine its specific upper register texture, the brightness that floats over Gaye's lead vocal and Whitfield's production, belongs to a woman whose name does not appear anywhere on the record. The song spent 7 consecutive weeks at #1 on the Hot 100. It became the biggest-selling Motown single in the label's history to that date.
What's happening? Yeah, man, look here. Something funky is going down, man.
It launched Marvin Gaye into the most commercially significant period of his career. And Louvain Demps, who walked into the studio and provided the soprano voice that is integral to the record's distinctive sound, received a flat session fee and no further acknowledgement. Number 10. Marlene Barrow. In 2018, an ARP journalist asked Marlene Barrow, then 73 years old, still alive, still carrying the memories of 10 years of uncredited work inside Hitsville, USA, which single record, from the thousands she had contributed to, she would put in a treasure chest. Her answer was immediate: Bernadette. Bernadette, released by the Four Tops in March 1967, was written and produced by Holland Dozier Holland and features one of Levi Stubbs' most powerful lead vocal performances, a voice carrying not just romantic urgency, but something closer to desperation, the specific sound of a man who knows that what he has can be taken away. The Four Tops' background harmonies frame that performance with the harmonic structure it needs. And underneath and around those harmonies, present on every session the Four Tops recorded at Motown, was Marlene Barrow. The Andantes sang on every Four Tops session. Baby, I need your loving. I can't help myself. Reach out, I'll be there. Bernadette, the full commercial run of one of the most celebrated vocal groups in soul music history, was supported, session by session, by 3 women whose names never appeared on a single Four Tops record. Marlene Barrow died in 2015 at the age of 73. She had chosen Bernadette as her treasure chest record, the one she most wanted to be remembered for. The record doesn't remember her name. The song still plays. The voice is still there, present in the harmonics, unmistakably real, completely invisible. If you're locked into this one, most people scrolling past these songs have no idea what it took to make them. We digs that history back up, one record at a time. The subscribe button costs nothing, and it means you won't miss the next one. Number 9. Jackie Hicks. Jackie Hicks was the first alto of the Andantes, the voice that sat between Louvain Demps' soprano and Marlene Barrow's second alto, holding the harmonic structure of the trio's blend in place.
Another day, another night,
She came to the Andantes from the gospel circuit, carrying with her the specific vocal training and the specific understanding of how 3 voices can occupy the same harmonic space that gospel quartets and church choirs had given Black America as a musical tradition. The Four Tops' debut Motown single, Baby I Need Your Loving, was released in 1964 and reached number 11 on the Hot 100. It introduced the combination of Levi Stubbs' urgently emotive lead vocal and the harmonic infrastructure behind it that would define the Four Tops' Motown sound across the following decade. That harmonic infrastructure, the specific way the background voices support Stubbs without competing with him, is an Andantes production as much as it is a Motown production. Jackie Hicks is in every moment of that background harmony. Her first alto sits precisely where it needs to sit, providing the mid-range fulcrum around which Louvain's soprano and Marlene's second alto move. The blend that Hicks described in 2018, first time, first song, perfect blend, is audible in Baby I Need Your Loving to anyone who knows to listen for it. In the ARP interview, Hicks appeared at Hitsville, USA in 2018, wearing a green pantsuit with matching socks set off by pink sneakers. She was 79 years old, She walked through the halls of the building where she had spent a decade of her life doing some of the most important, uncredited work in American musical history. And she had a green pantsuit on. She knew what she had done there. She was going to look good doing it. Number 8. Marlene Barrow, replacing Florence Ballard. The story of how the Andantes came to replace members of the Supremes on their studio recordings reveals something important about how Motown's quality control system actually worked, and about Florence Ballard's increasingly difficult position within the group in the years before she was formally fired in 1967. Florence Ballard had founded the Supremes. She had organized the group, chosen the name, held the auditions. She had been struggling from as early as 1960 with the aftermath of a traumatic assault, with the pressures of the commercial entertainment machine, and with Berry Gordy's systematic repositioning of the group around his personal relationship with Diana Ross. By the mid-1960s, her attendance at recording sessions was becoming inconsistent. Marlene Barrow began substituting for Ballard at specific sessions, not publicly, not with any announcement, but as a simple Motown quality control measure. If Florence was absent, or if her performance on a given session was deemed by Gordy or the producers to be below the standard required, Marlene Barrow stepped into her position in the group's vocal arrangement. Stop! In the Name of Love, released in February 1965, went to number 1 on the Hot 100. The Supremes are on the sleeve. The Supremes' name is on the label. The specific configuration of voices on the recording may or may not include Florence Ballard on every track. By 1967, according to multiple documented sources, the Andantes had replaced Mary Wilson and Cindy Birdsong on ALL Supreme studio recordings, not just Ballard sessions. The group credited on the sleeve was not always the group singing on the record. Number 7. The Andantes replacing the Marvelettes. The Marvelettes were the group that gave Motown its first number 1 pop hit, Please Mr. Postman, in 1961, the record that proved the label could compete commercially at the highest level of the mainstream pop market. They were, in the most literal possible sense, the commercial foundation on which everything else Motown built was constructed. By 1965, however, the Marvelettes' lineup had been significantly altered by illness, departures, and the inevitable attrition of years in the commercial performance system. Georgiana Tillman had left the group due to her debilitating sickle cell disease and lupus. The remaining members' vocal performances in the studio did not always meet the standard that Berry Gordy's quality control process required, so the Andantes were brought in. Not as a replacement group performing under their own name, as the Marvelettes. From 1965 to 1967, the Andantes provided the background vocals and in some cases the complete vocal arrangements other than Wanda Young's lead on Marvelettes recordings released under the Marvelettes name. The group historyofrock.com documented this directly. The Marvelettes' final album, The Return of the Marvelettes, could more accurately have been titled Wanda Young and the Andantes. As Young was the only original member still recording. When You're Young and in Love, released in 1967, reached number 9 on the R&B chart. It is credited to the Marvelettes. The voices behind Wanda Young on that recording are the Andantes. They received no credit. The Marvelettes received it all. Number 6. Billy Ray Calvin. Billy Ray Calvin came to Motown from a Los Angeles group called the Delegates, introduced to the label by singer Bobby Taylor in 1970. She and her fellow delegate Brenda Joyce Evans began providing background vocals for Motown artists immediately after arriving in LA, the timing coinciding exactly with Motown's relocation from Detroit.
No matter where you are, no matter how far.
Their contributions were significant and immediate. Billy Ray Calvin and Brenda Joyce Evans sang background on Diana Ross's Ain't No Mountain High Enough. The solo record that established Ross as a commercially dominant solo artist and launched her career out of the Supremes context into something entirely her own. The background vocal arrangement on Ain't No Mountain High Enough, which Gordy had initially refused to release as a single because he hated the spoken sections, was part of what gave the record its specific emotional scale. The voices supporting Ross in that arrangement helped the record feel as large as it does. Calvin went on to become part of Norman Whitfield's Undisputed Truth, one of Motown's psychedelic soul acts, and continued contributing to recordings across the early 1970s. Neither she nor Evans received credits on the original Ain't No Mountain High Enough release that acknowledged their contributions. The record Berry Gordy didn't want to release as a single, the record that DJs edited themselves out of the album and played until Motown was forced to put out an official edit, the record that went to #1 on both the pop and R&B charts. That record has uncredited background voices on it. Billy Ray Calvin is one of them. Number 5. The Rayber Voices. Before the Andantes, before the systematic use of uncredited background voices as quality control insurance, there was a founding group of background singers who were, in some sense, Motown itself in its earliest form. The Rayber Voices, the name a combination of Ray Noma and Berry Gordy's first names, were assembled by Berry Gordy and his then-wife, Ray Noma Lyles, in the late 1950s, as the label was taking its earliest shape. The group consisted of Ray Noma herself, Berry, Robert Bateman, Brian Holland, and anyone else hanging around, a description that captures the informal, energetic chaos of Hitsville, USA, before it became a commercial institution. Louvain Demps was among the Rayber Voices' early clients. She had seen an advertisement on a Detroit radio station and paid the Rayber Studio, which charged any Detroit musician who wanted to record, to make a record. This is how she met the people who would eventually hire her as the Andantes soprano. The Rayber Voices sang on the earliest Motown sessions, the recordings from 1959 and 1960, that the label was still feeling its way through, before the system had been formalized, before the quality control department existed, before the Andantes had been constituted as the designated background vocal solution. They were, in every meaningful sense, the prototype for everything that followed. The understanding that the right background vocals from the right voices were the specific element that turned a good recording into a Motown recording. None of them received credits. The recordings they contributed to exist. The voices are in them. The names are not. Number 4. Anne Bogan. This entry contains the most specific and the most ironic story in the Andantes' history. The story of the one record released under the Andantes' own name, which featured none of the actual Andantes as the lead voice. In 1964, Motown released Like a Nightmare on the VIP subsidiary, credited to the Andantes. It was the only single the label ever released under their own name, their one commercial opportunity to exist as credited artists rather than invisible contributors. The single that was supposed to be their moment. The lead voice on that recording was not Jackie Hicks, not Marlene Barrow, not Louvain Demps. It was Ann Bogan, a Detroit singer who had previously been associated with Harvey Fuqua's Harvey Records before Fuqua joined the Motown staff. Classic Motown's official documentation of the record states, the group on Like a Nightmare might better be billed as the Andantes because the lead voice on the recording was not a member. She was Ann Bogan. The Andantes had been singing uncredited on other artists' records for 2 years when this happened. The one record released under their own name featured someone else singing the lead. Motown's replacement logic, the practice of putting better or more available voices on other groups' records, had been applied to the Andantes' own single. Ann Bogan was an extraordinary talent. The record itself is a piece of excellent mid-1960s Motown pop. But the specific institutional irony, the group that spent a decade replacing other artists' voices on their records had their one commercial release fronted by someone who wasn't in the group, captures something essential about how Motown's ghost singer system actually operated. Number 3. Sylvia Moy. Stevie Wonder was 15 years old when Motown's quality control process almost ended his recording career. His singles in 1964 and early 1965 had not been performing commercially, and there was a real institutional conversation happening at Hitsville about whether the label's investment in the 12-year-old genius, now no longer 12, no longer generating the novelty appeal of his earliest hits, was worth continuing. Sylvia Moy was a songwriter at Motown who had come to the label without the full support of Berry Gordy's institutional machinery. She was not a full-time in-house songwriter in the traditional sense. The label's internal structure was predominantly male, but she was enormously talented, and she understood both music and the specific commercial requirements of the Motown system. She heard that Stevie Wonder's position at the label was uncertain and asked Berry Gordy for a chance to work with him. Gordy gave her one session. She and Wonder wrote Uptight, Everything's All Right together in that session, a record that reached number 1 on the R&B chart and number 3 on the Hot 100. And that launched Stevie Wonder into the commercial run that would sustain his Motown career until he renegotiated his own creative control in the early 1970s. Moy's contribution as co-writer and as the person who had essentially saved Wonder's Motown career by making the case for working with him was partially credited in the songwriting. But her production contribution and the full scale of what she had done were less visible in the institutional record. The person who saved the career of the artist, who would later be called the greatest musician alive, received a partial credit and no proportional share of the consequences. Number 2. James Jamerson.
You know we've got to find a way.
James Jamerson played bass on My Girl. He played it on Ain't No Mountain High Enough, on I Heard It Through the Grapevine, on What's Going On Dancing in the Street, on For Once in My Life, on Reach Out, I'll Be There.
Brother, brother, brother.
He was the primary bassist on approximately 30 Billboard #1 hits. Bass Player magazine named him the greatest bass player in history in 2017. He received no credit on virtually any of them. Motown did not list session musician credits on its releases until 1971, the year Marvin Gaye's What's Going On was released.
You
Gaye specifically acknowledged the incomparable James Jamerson on the What's Going On sleeve. It was the first time in Jamerson's decade of uncredited Motown work that his name had appeared on a major release. The What's Going On notation was not just a courtesy, it was a statement. Gaye making visible the invisible, acknowledging the specific human beings whose contributions the Motown system had systematically concealed.
For only love can conquer.
At the exact moment when the greatest album of the era was finally revealing the bassist who had been there all along, Jamerson was already losing his position. Motown moved to Los Angeles. The session market there was oversaturated. Jamerson's alcoholism worsened. He was not invited to perform at Motown's 25th anniversary concert. He was denied backstage access to the celebration of the music he had built. His bass, the 1962 Fender Precision, he called the Funk Machine, the instrument that had played on virtually every Motown hit of the 1960s, was stolen. He died in 1983 at 47, largely unknown to the public. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee in 2000, 17 years too late. Number 1. The Andantes. The Andantes, Jackie Hicks, Marlene Barrow, Louvain Demps, appeared on approximately 20,000 Motown recordings, 90% of the label's entire output before its 1972 move to Los Angeles. The Motown Museum's official page for the Andantes states that Hitsville, USA couldn't have operated on such a stratospheric level without their phenomenal contributions. I Can't Help Myself, Sugar Pie Honey Bunch, went to number 1 on the Hot 100 in June 1965 and held that position for 2 weeks. It became one of the most recognized Motown recordings in the label's history. The Four Tops name is on the record. The Four Tops name is on the sleeve. Levi Stubbs' extraordinary voice carries the lead vocal, and underneath that vocal, in the background harmony structure that gives the record its specific emotional texture, are the Andantes. When Motown made its move to Los Angeles in 1972, the Andantes were not invited to come. They were left in Detroit. The city where they had spent 10 years building the Motown sound was left with them in it, while the label that had used their voices on 20,000 recordings relocated without them. Louvain Demps received a contract offer from ABC Dunhill Records that ultimately fell through. She eventually received an offer of work in Atlanta. The Andantes disbanded. Marlene Barrow, the one who would have put Bernadette in the treasure chest, died in 2015 at 73. Jackie Hicks and Louvain Demps, both now in their 80s, returned to Hitsville, USA in 2018 and walked through the halls of the building where they had done their 10 years of invisible work. When asked what she wanted people to know, Louvain Demps said, "I don't care how high anybody goes. It does not lower me any lower, because I know what I did. She did. Now you do too."